This is the story of our house, but it's really the story of three houses. The one in which we pray, the one in which we learn, and the one in which we gather with family and friends to share in God's gift of life. Our house on Spotswood Avenue, B'nai Israel Congregation, celebrates 50 years as the cornerstone of Torah living and learning in Hampton Roads. It begins the same way every morning, with prayer. B'nai Israel is the consummation of over 100 years of orthodoxy in Norfolk. There were once 5 Orthodox synagogues in the city. Some were small and intimate, while other housed congregations that numbered in the hundreds. Cumberland Street, Holt Street, Berkeley, Charlotte Street, and 20th Street. Once alive and vibrant, now all gone, except in the memories of those who were there. It all began in Berkeley in the early 1880s, when Eastern European Jewish immigrants began migrating from more northern ports of entry in New York and Baltimore.
Initially, a lot of the Jews settled in Berkeley, which was somewhat to the south of Norfolk, but it was at that time it was considered Norfolk County. They formed their own synagogue called Mikra Kodesh or Mikra Kodesh, which actually was the same name as a synagogue in Baltimore, and apparently they all came from roughly the same area mostly in Lithuania.
When I was growing up, well, it's completely changed now. They had a lot of stores all along Liberty Street here, which is the street in front of the shul, and there were a lot of kosher shops. You had a delicatessen, you had 2 kosher meat markets, and I think it had a population of the Jewish population of about, I would say about maybe close to 100 families.
The influx of Jews to Norfolk continued through the end of the century. By the 1890s, the Eastern Europeans were moving into the area around Lower Church Street in downtown Norfolk. In the process, forming such a strong hub of Jewish life, it can only be described as the Lower East Side, Southern style.
They had their businesses largely on Church Street. A lot of them lived above the stores on Church Street. Many of them were dry goods merchants, grocers, pawn shops, saloon keepers.
Go to them Durskis. That was the best restaurant at the time. I think for 75 cents you get a 6-course dinner, steak and everything. We had a Jewish life. We had the Talmud Torah, the halls, synagogue.
And while the Jews worked and played on Church Street, many of them lived and prayed on Holt Street. Kahal Hasidim, or the Holt Street Shul as it was better known, was located in the heart of one of Norfolk's busier Jewish areas. A large row house with a community mikveh in the basement. The service at the Holt Street Shul was closer in style to the exuberance found among 19th century European Hasidim. And just down the street and around the corner on Cumberland Street was the largest shul of all, the original B'nai Israel, otherwise known as the Big Shul.
The first permanent building, which lasted for about 50 years, was purchased on Cumberland Street from the Cumberland Street Methodist Church. It was in fact a building that had been built around 1850.
I was the last president of the old synagogue on Cumberland Street, which was the B'nai Israel. The B'nai Israel had probably been around 70 or 80 years before that, but the majority of us wanted to link up with an Orthodox synagogue. The only one in town was the United Orthodox, which was a combination of several older synagogues which had gone under. And our stipulation was that we wanted the name of B'nai Israel to remain in there. And so it was agreed.
The Cumberland Street Shul continued to operate until the late 1950s, even after the establishment of the Spotswood Avenue Synagogue. The migration of Jews out of downtown made its future uncertain, and in 1958, the Big Shul merged with the United Orthodox Synagogue.
Yeah, the first real reflection of a division, somewhat of a division within B'nai Israel on Cumberland Street, was reflected in the establishment of Ahavas Israel, which was also known as the Charlotte Street Shul. At that time, you must understand that the synagogues were largely made up still of Russian Jewish immigrants, so there could be a lot of disagreement naturally.
Just as Jews had traded up economically from Eastern Europe to America, they also desired to move from Berkeley and the older downtown areas to newer and more recently developed neighborhoods, such as Ghent, Park Place, and Colonial Place. In 1927, a new shul was established on 20th Street to accommodate this thriving but small Orthodox community.
It was Beth Abraham, and it seemed big enough in those days. I never thought of it as being particularly small, but it was our shul. It was, well, I was living right across the street, and went to Shabbos services, High Holy Day services, and this was the heart and soul of the Jewish community as far as I was concerned.
Although there were 5 separate Orthodox shuls during this period, all with very distinct personalities, there was a unifying spirit and force that made them one community. His name was Rabbi Jacob Gordon. Officially, he was the senior rabbi of Bnei Israel on Cumberland Street, but in reality, from 1907 until his passing in 1947, he was the spiritual leader of Norfolk's entire Orthodox community.
By the 1940s, the membership of Kahal Hasidim, the Holt Street Shul, and the 20th Street Shul felt that there was a need to really to merge together and to move a bit further westward, and ultimately this created the United Orthodox Synagogue, which is the current B'nai Israel.
It was Sunday, September 7th, 1947. I used to stay open half a day on Sunday, and I came to the dedication with my camera, and I took some pictures.
A young Orthodox rabbi had never served a congregation in this community. And this was a kind of revolutionary in a sense, that here was an English-speaking young Orthodox rabbi coming into a community that spoke the language of the people and could communicate with them and relate to them. I was a novice. I was young. I was inexperienced. And my impressions were in meeting some of the elders of the congregation that they were very Jewishly inclined and had an appreciation for Jewish values and the like.
Spotswood Avenue became the center of renewal of our ancient Jewish faith for a new generation of sophisticated Americans. Rabbi Schechter and the leaders of the shul recognized that traditional Jewish living seemed to be in direct competition with the good life the Jews had made for themselves in America.
The future of Judaism depends upon the education that we will provide children and young adults, and in general the teaching of Torah. I mean, this becomes paramount in our lives, and we felt it was important to organize a Talmud Torah. We established a Sunday school and a Hebrew school, and it flourished. We would have model seders, we would have Hanukkah programs, and we'd have junior congregation, as I recall, and all of these things were significant and important.
It is said that a Jew is known by his good works. Nowhere is this better exemplified than in the sisterhood. Founded in 1933 at Beth Abraham on 20th Street, it continues today to serve the entire Jewish community.
B'nai Israel Sisterhood is really composed of dedicated women who feel an obligation to Judaism. All the women, we have a great bunch of women, they all strive to be the right hand of the rabbi.
Born in Copenhagen, Denmark, Israel Bornstein left the path of a mainstream secular education at the age of 15 to study at the yeshiva in Kamenetz, Poland, with the famous Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Ber Leibowitz. In 1939, he returned home as war threatened Europe. Forced to leave by the German occupation of Denmark, Rabbi Bornstein and his family fled to Sweden to avoid capture by the Nazis. In Stockholm, he attended business school in the evening, worked in the import-export business, and served as chazan in a local Polish-style synagogue. Eastern European Jewry was decimated, and many, especially the young, looked to America for a new beginning.
First time I set eyes on Israel Bornstein when he came as a student to the Near Israel Rabbinical College. I see him sitting in one of the back rows of the base medrash, always neat and immaculate, looking into his Talmud. We needed a teacher and a chazan, and he fit the bill. He had the qualities of a chazan, and he had some real good insight into education and the teaching of children. When he came here, Joe, there was never a question in my mind that, knowing that he was ordained, I went to the board immediately and I said, Rabbi Bornstein will be my associate.
When I got to Norfolk, it was a surprise. I wouldn't say I was shocked, because I had lived in America for 3 years, but it was nothing like I had imagined. Because in those days, I think Rabbi Schechter must also have mentioned it, orthodoxy was somehow not well accepted. In 1949, an Orthodox Jew was normally a Jew. Normally. There were some exceptions. Was normally a Jew who did not observe the Shabbos too strictly. And also, most of those that belonged to the congregation had either been in Europe or were actually European Jews. So the concept that they came with and their understanding of America was strictly European. And these people understood Orthodoxy the way it was understood in Europe. However, they did not understand that they would have to take their Judaism and somehow incorporate it and integrate it with the secular climate that they found here. They were unable to digest that and to make that a kind of a combination, to live as fully as a Jew in secular and cultural America of the time. So there was a lack of Jewish pride in the Jewish tradition and in the Jewish religion that made itself felt. It was not in the home enough. Hebrew Academy was very helpful in that actually it was a vast improvement simply in educational terms, because we had Hebrew afternoon schools which really couldn't give a Jewish child an adequate Hebrew education within a few hours, scattered throughout the week. So the Hebrew Academy, a day school education, was a vast improvement in educational terms.
In 1961, Rabbi Schechter stepped down to take a position with Ner Israel Rabbinical College in Baltimore. That fall, after 12 years as an associate rabbi in Cantor, Israel Bornstein became senior rabbi of B'nai Israel congregation.
Before that, I might have had thoughts of actually not settling in Norfolk, because there was really nothing to keep me here, to be honest with you. But once I became the rabbi of the congregation, somehow over the years I became so rooted, and since I'm single, let's face it, the congregation became my child, and so it became a part of myself. So whatever happened to the congregation, or for that matter the Hebrew Academy, it was as if it was happening to me myself. So therefore it was, once I had decided to stay on, I didn't have a choice but to fight it out. And as I explained before, these were lean years for Orthodoxy. They were very lean because Orthodoxy was not popular. The return that happened was towards the latter part of my tenure. There was not only a return here and a resurgence and a revival of the congregation, there was a revival of Orthodoxy throughout the entire nation. It was nationwide. My own definition would be, we had actually up to that point been competitors with the conservatives. We wanted to show ourselves as up to date as they were. So you can do it, we can do it. However, the Orthodox, although you give it an outward modern appearance, the bottom line is prescribed by the Shulchan Aruch. There's only that far you can go. We can only make that many changes or that many accommodations. But by and large, the essence, we cannot change the essence of Jewish law or the essence of our observances, even if it should mean closing up the doors. Orthodoxy began then to realize we don't have to compete with anyone. We are not in competition. We have to know who we are. And that was a full return of we rediscovered for the American Orthodox adherent that the Shabbos should be as observed the same way it was observed when the Torah was given on Mount Sinai, the same way it was observed in Europe, and that in America you don't have the privilege of breaking any laws with immunity and impunity. It's not just religion, or even some are looking for real observance, some are looking for real scholarship, and some are looking for a spiritual experience. They feel that they can have all that within Orthodoxy.
Rabbi Bornstein retired in 1988 as Rabbi Emeritus. In 1990, Rabbi Shlomo Goder assumed the leadership of Bnei Israel to begin what seemed to be the start of a long and promising career.
When I met Rabbi Goder, he was actually, this was his first rabbinic post. I think he was 22 at the time, and he came here with Tove. When they came here, we thought more of them, as I said, at the sad occasion of his commemoration, that we thought of them more of him and her as an adoption at the time than anything else. But he was a very brilliant young scholar, and he was very eager and very dramatic, and she was very lovely and very brilliant. I never offered advice without having been asked, but when he asked me, I gave him advice, and he found over time that I stood by him whenever he had a rocky road ahead, and that also that the advice I gave him normally would be sound. So he felt he had a good friend in me, and that made me feel wonderful, because at that stage, you know, he became almost like a son. It was shocking, I guess, but he handled this as a trooper. He was a very believing person, and he believed that if God had ordained that, he would accept it. It was very difficult for him and for her. I think that Rabbi Friedman comes very well equipped to handle the Orthodox synagogue in the time that we are in, because he has been in a youth organization, and he understands the modern young American's mind, what makes them tick, and he has an immediate appeal. He comes across very direct. For instance, with me, while it took a while for me and Rabbi Goder to establish a good, mutually trusting relationship, with him it was the first day he came. From the first day on, the entire texture of the synagogue has changed. If you look at the synagogue on Shabbos, you will see that there has been a change. We certainly we appreciate those who are seniors and more mature, but on the other hand, you'll see that the texture of the people who attend and who are involved in the synagogue are increasingly young people. and that promises well for the future.